And welcome to the Measuring Research Impact class. My name is Julie Trumbull. I'm Head of Reference and Educational Services at Moody Medical Library, and I'm going to go over the class material today. We are starting out on a guide that we have created to support the class material. You can find the guide at guides.utmb.edu/impact. So as an introduction, scholars are expected to pursue research and contribute the results of their investigations. They usually want to have some way of proving that the work that they've done is making an impact on science or on the world. And ever since, I think, publication began, they started trying to look at ways of how do we evaluate this? How can we tell that we're making a difference? So people started figuring out different ways to measure things. If we're looking for a metric, we would hope that the metric would be objectively derived so that if we both tried to put it together, we could come up with the same answer. We would want it to be simple to do so it doesn't take us 5 months to try to figure out the calculation. We want it to be consistent and able to be consistently applied across articles and disciplines. We also want it to be fair so that maybe newer researchers aren't overly disadvantaged over people who have been doing it for a lifetime. The metrics that we'll be looking at are all based on from the scientific literature, and we'll be looking at things from a simple to publication count into some newer things that have come out a little more recently called the H index and the Eigen factor. Of course, with every metric, there are advantages and drawbacks and sort of the caveats that sort of see where they fall on the objective to the simple to the fair scale. So I'm going to the publication count tab, and just some words here about publication count. That is almost exactly what it sounds like. I'm going to measure a researcher's impact by just looking about the quantity of work that they've done. So we would do an author search, and we would find out that this researcher A has 5 publications, and we'd see that researcher B has 10 publications. Now, does that mean that those 10 publications are better than the 5 publications, or that this person's a better person because they've done twice as many articles? Maybe, maybe not. That gets into where it may not be fair because obviously the publication count method is going to favor somebody who has been working longer than somebody who is brand new to the field. The other kind of issue that can come up with just looking at publication count is the idea of salami publication, or basically where you've taken a study and you've figured out all these different ways to thinly slice it to get as many publications as you can out of one piece of work. Sometimes that is definitely appropriate and makes good sense. Other times it starts going, you might start kind of going, really? I think you probably could have combined that into one article. So those are things to look at in terms of publication count. It's not bad, and if you have done a lot of work, then that raw quantity does say something about your about how prolific that you were able to be in a given time period. But that is, as I said, one of the least sophisticated measures, and so we can move on to impact factor. And I'm clicking on the impact factor now to bring up that page. And the impact factor was devised by a man named Dr. Eugene Garfield, and he was wanting it to be a tool for librarians to use when they're looking at their journal collection and deciding which journal should be canceled or kept or added. It was then quickly adopted by other people as a way of trying to measure their work based on the quality of the journal that the work is in. So the impact factor is a calculation where the numerator is the number of times articles in a journal were cited in the Web of Science database during the preceding 2 years. And the denominator is the total number of citable items that were published in that journal in the same time period. So of the entire number of journals that were published, or number of articles that were published in a journal over the last 2 years, how many of those were cited by somebody else? And so if you see that there were a total number of articles from the journal was was 20,190, but there were 691 articles published in the previous 2 years, then that would give you the impact factor of 29.218. And the impact factor data is available through a resource called Journal Citations Reports, and we have links to that on the library's homepage. We also have a link to it here in this particular guide. Before we get in and take a look at it, there are some criticisms from it. They say that there's a bias towards American and European literature, and not so much on the African and Asian journals. Even getting into what is a quote-unquote citable item has been a little tricky, because do you count the letters to the editor? Do you count any sort of maybe obituaries? That would probably not, but at what point is an obituary considered a citable or not citable item? So what are you counting when you are looking at the different items that appear in journals and thinking about what numbers count's going to go into making that denominator? Editors and authors can manipulate the impact factor of a journal, or especially the editors, by suggesting that authors add articles from their own journal in order to be considered for publication. Oh yeah, we'll accept your article, but I think you need to consider citing Smith and Jones, and you thought, wow, the Smith and Jones article happens to be also in that journal. And then the impact factor data is really mostly available in the journal database, that Journal Citations Report that I just mentioned. Now, sometimes you can go to a journal's homepage, and on the journal's homepage they'll say, and our impact factor is whatever the number is. Of course, the journals most likely to do that are going to be ones who feel like their impact factor is really, really good. The other thing is, not every single journal in the world has an impact factor. It's going to be just the journals that are considered for inclusion for the Web of Science database. The Web of Science database is trying to cover every scientific discipline, so everything from, say, astronomy through zoology. So they're covering many, many fields, but they don't cover every field very deeply. So you could have a perfectly good journal that doesn't have an impact factor just because it doesn't participate, or it was not selected for inclusion in the Web of Science database. So if I click on our link that says impact factors, then that will take me into the Journal Citation Reports. We just decided to link it as impact factors because that's usually what people are going there for. When I open up the Journal Citation Reports, it is bringing me to a list of journals that are included, just automatically sorted here by impact factor. So if I wanted to browse the hundreds and hundreds of journals that were in here, I could do so. Or I can come over to the search box and type in a journal name and look at just that journal's information. So if I type in JAMA, then I can select Journal of the American Medical Association from the list. It just kind of jumped away from me there. Let me try that again. There we go. When I actually click on a journal, then I'm going to be able to see information about the journal. From some of the data goes all the way back to 97, and then some of it has NAs because they didn't start collecting that data until, it looks like, around 2007. But I can see, let me scroll down, pull that up. I can see the impact factor if I remove journal self-citations. I can also see a 5-year average and some other information which we'll talk about in just a minute, including another place to get where you would see what the Eigen factor score is, the article influence score, etc. We'll talk about those in a moment. And then if I scroll down a little bit further, then I can see the source information that they used for calculating the impact factor. There's a link that says rank, and so I can see where JAMA ranks in the general and internal medicine category, and then some other information about the journal here. But again, if I wanted just to know the impact factor of JAMA, I would see that it's 35.289. If I want to know, if I want to remove any self-citations, then that goes down to 34.445. And also say self-citations aren't always bad, because if a good article is in JAMA, of course you're going to include that in the bibliography, and that's not trying to quote-unquote game the system. Same thing with maybe citing an article that you've written. If you wrote the article that's sort of defining an area in a field, you have to cite it even though you were part of writing it. So it's not always a bad thing. You just have to make sure that you're doing it for legitimate reasons and not overdoing it to try to game the system, either in helping the journal get good numbers or helping yourself get good numbers. The other thing you can do in the journal citation reports is look at journals by category. So I can click on Select Categories, and it'll give me just an alphabetic list of every discipline that's included in the journal citation reports. And that can, you might want to do this if you have an article and you're trying to decide where you want to publish it and you're not quite sure where to go. Maybe you would choose an article, a journal that had a higher impact factor than maybe one that had lower, or maybe that's how you would prioritize where you submit a particular reference. And so if I wanted to maybe choose pediatrics, well, it didn't select. This title changes. I'm also using Internet Explorer right now, and some of our resources don't play well with Internet Explorer, so I'm wondering if I'm missing a button because of the database that I'm in. But you should be able to pull up category data so that you can compare, so you can look at journals sort of ranked together in a particular category. It also has a categories by rank, so that I can see that economics is apparently the category with the, it has the largest number of journals in it apparently. Then I can also sort that by impact factor and see that if I go by impact factor, cell biology is the best category. And that's another sort of criticism or problem with journal citation reports. Once you start crossing subject categories, it's really hard to do comparisons. And even within a particular category, you might start seeing some really specific subdivisions in the different titles that are available. So if you have a general cell biology article, then but they have this very, very specific cell biology journal title, and they've recently upgraded the interface here. Oh, there we are. There's my list of journals. So something that might be appropriate to submit to nucleic acids research may not be also appropriate to submit to the journal Oncogene. So Oncogene is going to be specific to the cancer genetics field, whereas nucleic acids research is going to be a little bit broader. And that's reflected in sort of the impact factors that those particular journals have. The nucleic acid research is going to be ranked a bit higher because since it's more general, it has a wider variety of articles that can be submitted to it and a wider variety of fields that might be looking at that journal to cite it, whereas the Oncogene is going to be maybe a little bit more specific. So those are just sort of the things about the impact factor. The other thing that's important to remember about impact factor is that it is a journal measure. It's not an individual measure. People will sometimes say, well, what's my impact factor? Well, individuals tend to not have impact factors. That tends to be a measure that they use, again, to talk about the journals that the articles are published in. When we get into the Eigen factor, that is another way to look at the quality of the journal that you're publishing in. And that is trying to say that it's more important to be cited by a journal, by some journals rather than other journals. It would be, you would have greater impact if you're, say, cited by JAMA than if you're cited by Joe Doak's Journal of Internal Medicine or something like that. So it's trying to look at PageRank algorithms and looking at the relevance of the results. So some people say that the eigenfactor overcomes some of the weaknesses of the impact factor. It's looking at 5 years of data instead of 2. There's places where you can find the eigenfactor without having a subscription to the journal citation reports, even though you can see them in the journal citation reports as well. And it's trying to look at the relative influence of the journals. Again, if there's a lot of citations to a journal, then that journal is going to be weighted a bit better. And then if you're cited by one of those journals that's weighted a bit better, then that makes you a little bit better. Article influence is another tool that kind of goes, that's calculated from the eigenfactor. I tried to say make eigenimpact factor a single word, but eigenfactor. So, and with the article influence, you come up with a mean of 1. And so or the mean is 1. And so if you get an article influence score lower than 1, then that means that you have sort of, I guess, below average influence, whereas greater than 1, then you have above average influence. And so just kind of another, maybe a more simplistic way of sort of looking at a journal. You see the article influence, and if it's, at 1 or higher, then it's going to have a better influence than one with a lower number. And again, what is your likelihood of being cited? So if you publish in this journal, are you more likely to be discovered by somebody else and then used to influence their research, or therefore cited in their publications compared to another title? Citation count starts getting back into ways of looking at an individual rather than looking at the journals that that individual is published in. And that's saying, from a particular article that was written, how many times was it cited by somebody else? We find this information in the Web of Science database. There are other databases that start trying to provide citation counts. One database, which we don't currently have, is called Scopus. The UT system has a program called Influent, where they're trying to look at the work of UT researchers, and the Influent record for an individual person will show the number of times particular articles are cited, and that information is coming from the Scopus database. You may also see citation counts in other databases that you're searching. For example, if you're looking in the Cumulative Index to Nursing and Allied Health Literature, sometimes you'll run across a record that'll say that it's been cited, 2 times or something like that. The drawback to looking at that information in CENL is that they're only looking at the times that an article has been cited by another journal or another article that's in CENL. So it's a much smaller pool than any of the other places that we're looking at, and they tend to be really undercounts if you use those database-specific accounts. So that's a feature in those databases that I pretty much just ignore and just gloss over if I ever even see it. You may also see citation counts in Google Scholar, and Google Scholar is fairly well known for inflating the citation count. Because their algorithm doesn't always count things correctly. So you run the gamut. Undercounts in specific databases like CENL, overcounts if you look in something like Google Scholar. So really you're better off doing something like Web of Science or Scopus, who are kind of known for having more accurate ways of counting the cited references. Drawbacks of using citation counting, the databases that do this, that do it well, are expensive, and so you might not have ready access to that. You might then have to learn how to search those databases. you have to pay attention to the time periods covered by the different databases. Web of Science is going back, I think, into the 1940s. When Scopus started, it was only going citation counts back to 1996. I do know that they're working on moving further back in time, but sort of looking at how far you go back, depending on when the article is written, can really influence the cited reference count that's available. Citation counting is also looking at what appears in sort of the scholarly record. So it's looking at use in other journal articles. It's not necessarily looking at use when it's been cited by a book or a book chapter, which could be might be problematic. It's also not looking at its influence online or something like that. So it may have only been cited twice, but wow, it's been downloaded 500 times. Or also looking at different social media impacts. So wow, not only was this article published, but it's also started making an impact into the world, because we're seeing it discussed on maybe a talk show, or it resulted in some conversations on social media. Whether that's valuable or not is also really up for debate, and kind of goes into the information that's under the Alt Metrics tab. So if I go in to Web of Science, there is a place where I can then click on the down arrow by basic search and turn it into cited reference search. I can type in the author's name and initials. I can type in the journal that it appears in. There's another blank for the year. I usually either do the author and the journal, or the author and the year, but usually not all three, because I want to increase the likelihood of finding the people who messed up in their bibliographies and didn't get the citation exactly right. So when I do that search in Web of Science, I can see this article by D.R. Cahoon in Nature has been cited 170 times, where 170 different articles got the citation exactly right in their bibliographies. If I look down a little bit, I can see that 7 people thought that there was something really great on page 813, or they just had the start page of the article written down incorrectly. One person got the citation mostly correct, but they left off the 9 in 359, so they got the volume number of the journal wrong. And then one person managed to get the volume and the page number correct, but they screwed up on the citing year. So actually this article has been cited 179 times. And so if you were trying to show your citation count for your journal, you would probably want to include those mistaken bibliographies as well, just so that your number is as best as it can be. And going back to the guide. Now there's also something called the H index, and again, this is a way to measure an individual. It was devised by Professor Jorge Hirsch, though they say that the H index is not supposed to stand for the Hirsch index. I think it was just whatever letter he decided to pick. But when you are looking at the H index, you're taking an author's publications and you're arranging them in order from the most cited to the least cited. And then you just start counting down the list. So I've got the most cited article at the very top, down to the least cited at the bottom, and I'm going to start counting. So when I get down to, if I count down to 5, and that article has been cited 5 times, and then the next article was cited 4 times, and that means that author's H index would be 5. Or the example we give on this web page is when I reach the 11th citation and it was cited 11 times, that means his H index is 11. You can find an author's H index in Web of Science. You'll also see it listed in Influent, the UT system. Again, researcher profiles. We have a page just for UTMB, but all of the UT system institutions have their own Influent page. And that's Influent with 2 U's if you were going to go try to Google that later on. And you can pull somebody up. I can look at a particular expert. and they'll list the H index. And then if I start looking at their actual publications, what they call research outputs in the influence system, then and sort those by, well, they don't actually let me cite those by publication count, but I could do that in Web of Science. And I could sort of see visually that, oh yeah, I've hit the number 40. The 47th publication on the list is what is has been cited 47 times. Does that make sense? Oops, if I click on the right icon, that would help. And then finally, there's alt metrics. I mentioned those a little bit. So you might start seeing on different journal platforms, this article's been downloaded, 5 times or 50 times. Trying to say that the number of downloads or the number of page views gives you an idea of the number of times that somebody has actually looked at and read this article. There's going to be a time period or a time lag between when an article comes out and when it's read, and then when it actually is physically capable of being cited. Because I've read that article and it's influencing my work and my thinking, but I don't write my article for another year, even though that article has been helping me think about the work that I'm doing all along. The nice thing about those is, there's probably an automatic way for the different publishers to calculate that. Maybe the downside is it'd be really easy for me to go and click on my article over and over and over again to try to make those download hits go up. And again, how useful that is sort of in the formative stages. Also, what does it mean if my work is discussed on Good Morning America? Does that mean that I have some good influence in how I'm influencing the world? What if there's a big Twitter conversation about it or something like that? Is that important or not, or where does that fit? And again, I think the world is still trying to kind of wrap their heads around sort of how we want to value, or should we value those other kinds of ways of looking at particular work. There may be some places where it would be perfectly acceptable to say, hey, look, it received so many likes when it was posted on the institution's Facebook page, where other places might go, that's absolutely ridiculous, and we don't want to consider that. Come back to to these other measures that we're more used to. So in conclusion, there are lots of different efforts to try to evaluate the work that's being done, some more on the journal level. And so we'll say that this container of journal articles is good. And so if you can get into one of those good containers, and therefore you're good, versus things to look at how much your work is being used. And then therefore saying, well, your work is being used a lot, so therefore you're quote unquote good, or something like that. We have a link to an article in Nature listed below that kind of goes over some of the measures that we've talked about. That might also be another resource to continue your reading about research impact, if that's something that is of interest to you. So that concludes the class that we have today. And if you have questions, I would encourage you to contact us at askus.utmb.edu or the Ask a Librarian links that are on the library's homepage.